Alright, good morning everybody. Brian S. Pratt here. I'm going to read chapter 6 of Fires of Prophecy, book 2 of the Morcyth Saga. Slight recap. The kids escaped the forest fire that James set. He's learning the consequences of magic. They crossed a chasm, encountered some bandits, killed them, discovered that that the bandits had a wagon, but a lot of horses, a lot of gold, and they have cargo that is going to be delivered to Khorasan, where they're headed, because that's where they figured that their friends are going to be sold at. So here begins Delia, the caravan mistress, right? She's going to realize that she's got a knack for this, and that carries throughout the whole series. I really like Delia. I named her after a friend of my mom's. Yeah, nice lady. And so they're waking now. The morning after that they got they took out the bandits and acquired the wagon. Chapter 6. When they woke in the morning and were ready to harness the horses to the wagons, they came to the realization that no one knew how. Each wagon required 2 horses. Which ones of the 8 were easy to figure out, as they were bigger and more muscular than the others. But the problem came when they attempted to attach the traces. The first time they thought they had it figured, when Tanakh flicked the reins to get them moving, the horses walked right out of them. Yeah, that's better. Walked out of them. Delia laughed so hard when the horses continued down the road while the traces fell to the ground. Tanakh was nearly pulled from the wagon but let go of the reins in time. Nice, Delia said. Her brown eyes danced with amusement. Trying to ignore the girls, Jerome ran after the horses and quickly brought them back. Taking their time and lots of trial and error, Jerome and Tanakh finally enlisted James's aid, and together they figured it out. Once certain the horses weren't going to leave their traces behind again, they boarded the wagons. On one wagon rode Delia and James, with Delia attempting to drive the wagon but found it more difficult than she had anticipated. Tanakh drove the second wagon behind them, with Cassie sitting next to him. Okay, hang on a second. Jerome took the lead on horseback. The rest of the horses were strung in line behind Tanakh's wagon. Once the wagon started rolling, they learned the finer points of controlling a team of horses. Delia at first had her wagon weaving from one side of the road to the other, and once had stopped for no apparent reason. By the end of the day, however, both she and Tanakh were able to control them with some skill. The road was barely wide enough to accommodate the wagons. At one point, Delia was afraid her wheels would slide off the narrow road and cause the wagon to slide down the mountainside. Near the end of the day, they located a good spot to make camp, an area little more than a widening of the road amidst the trees. From the campfire ring found there, it would seem the smugglers had used this spot on more than one occasion. James's shoulder hurt worse than the day before. After removing the horses from their traces and tethering them to a nearby tree, he had Delia remove the bandage and inspect the wound. The area surrounding it had turned red and was warm to the touch. "I think it's turning bad," she said, concern in her eyes. "Great," he moaned. "Was there any alcohol in the wagons?" "Why? It may help to purify the wound," he explained. "Maybe even kill the infection." "I'll see," she said as she went over and rummaged the wagons. She returned shortly with a bottle. "This was all I could find," she explained, holding it out to him. "Not sure what's in it, though." "Just put it back," he told her. "I'd rather not take the chance." She returned the bottle to the wagon and then went to confer with Cassie. They talked briefly where he couldn't overhear. Cassie walked to the trees and entered the forest. Tanakh saw her leaving and ran after her. Delia returned to him and said, "Cassie has had some training with herbs. She may be able to locate those that will help." James nodded as he lay there, beginning to feel worse. His face felt flesh and his body ached all over. A sure sign of a fever. Cassie and Tanakh returned with various leaves and petals. She took a bowl from a wagon and proceeded to mash them together. Once the ingredients had been combined, she tore a new set of bandages from a cloak found within one of the wagons and applied the mixture to it before bringing it to James. Removing the old bandage, she tossed it into the fire before applying the new one. When the mixture touched his skin, it brought a cool, soothing sensation. The pain noticeably diminished, and he was able to relax a little more at ease. "Thank you," he said appreciatively. "You're welcome," she replied with a smile, happy to have eased his pain. He then closed his eyes and soon drifted off to sleep. Cassie said, "I don't like the look of his wound. The poultice I applied will ease the pain, but will do nothing to stop whatever is causing the redness and fever." "What can we do?" Jerome asked. "Wait," she said. "All we can do is wait." "Can he find more of those herbs?" he asked. "He may need them again later." "I'll pick more." She went to the wagon and removed a basket, then headed for the forest. "I'll go with you," Tanuk said as he got to his feet to accompany her. Seeing the look on Jerome's face, he added, "There may be wild animals out there. You never know." Then he hurried to catch her. Jerome turned to Delia. "There may be something developing between those two." She watched them go into the forest together and replied, "You may be right, but I doubt if they even realize it." Cassie and Tanuk returned sometime later with a basket full of herbs and roots. She placed them in the wagon and then went to inspect James. He was hot with fever and beginning to perspire. "This is bad," she said, concern in her voice. "Bad?" asked Jerome. "How bad?" asked Tanuk at the same time. If he gets too hot, then he'll die," she explained. "I've seen people who have died because their fevers grew too intense." "What can we do?" "As I said before, wait. Either it will go away on its own, or it will kill him. Only the gods know for sure." She took a moist cloth and dabbed his forehead as she tried to keep him cool, wiping away his perspiration. They sat and waited, afraid of what may happen. The night exploded with light, startling them to wakefulness. They found James standing and staring off into the woods. He raised his hands and cried out with words none could understand. Trees simply exploded, shattered into millions of pieces. "We're under attack!" Tanuk yelled as he came to his feet, knives at the ready. A rain of wood splinters fell all around them, the larger ones causing pain when they struck exposed skin. "Where are they?" Jerome yelled at James. He came to stand with him, knives in hand, and stared off into the dark forest in the direction he faced. Not paying them any attention, James sent a wave of energy into the forest, beyond the jagged stumps of the trees which had already been shattered. Dozens of trees bowed and broke, many snapping in two as they crashed to the ground from the force of the power he unleashed. "I don't see anyone," Tanuk yelled to Jerome. "Protect the girls," Jerome hollered as he raced closer to the devastated area, seeking their attackers. James cried out again, and the wind blew with increased ferocity. The trees swayed first one way and then the other. Limbs throughout the immediate area broke under the force of the onslaught and crashed to the ground. Cassie yelled to Tanuk over the roar of the wind as he approached. "There is no one!" "What?" "There is no one!" she cried, and then pointed to James. "Look at his eyes. He's not really seeing. It's the fever. He's having a hallucination." She pulled her long yellow hair out of her face from where the wind continued whipping it. As understanding dawned upon him, he sheathed his knives and hurried to Jerome. Before he got to him, James cried out again, and lightning flashed from the sky, striking trees near where Jerome stood, the force of which knocked him off his feet. He landed on his back, dazed, just as Tanuk reached him. Tanuk knelt next to him and then looked up when James screamed incoherently. As he ran into the forest, Jerome tried to get back to his feet to follow. Tanuk placed a hand on his arm and said, He's fighting dreams." "What?" Jerome asked in confusion, not sure he had heard correctly. "James!" Tanuk yelled, pointing to where he ran into the forest. "It's the fever making him do this. We're not under attack." Once he realized what Tanuk was trying to tell him, he said, "We've got to help him." He climbed to his feet and looked toward the forest where James had entered just as another explosion of immense proportion erupted into the sky. "We can't," yelled Tanuk over the wind. "He'll kill us without even realizing it." "But," Jerome said, wanting to help, but recognizing the truth in Tanuk's words. He looked around the camp, wood everywhere. A section of the forest nearby was simply gone. Trees were toppled over. Most of the horses had run off, frightened. They gathered together, and he asked Cassie, "What should we do?" "Nothing to do," she explained. "He doesn't realize what he's doing. It will run its course if it doesn't kill him first." "How long?" Shrugging, she says, "Who knows? We'll find out when the noise stops." They looked off into the forest as more lights were seen and explosions heard. A light rain began to fall a few minutes later, and after it had fallen for a while, the sounds of explosions from the forest lessened until it was once again quiet. Should we find him? Delia asked as the rain continued to fall, plastering her short, dark brown hair to her head. Shaking his head, Jerome said, "Not in the dark, we might get lost. Besides, there is no guarantee that he's done." They settled down to wait for dawn. None were able to get any rest, what with the rain soaking them and their concern for their friend. Sometime before morning came, the rain stopped. When dawn at last arrived, they were able to fully see the extent of the damage wrought by James during his fever-induced rampage. Trees were either blown apart at the base or toppled over one upon another. Wood was simply everywhere. The wagons themselves had a layer of broken branches and wood chips covering them. Most of the horses had found their way back, 3 of the draft animals and 4 of the mounted. A quick look around the surrounding area turned up 1 more mounted and the other draft animal. Should we go look for him now?" Jerome asked Cassie. "Since we haven't heard anything for a couple hours, it's fairly safe to say that he is no longer a danger. We need to find him to see if he's okay." Indicating the path of destruction, Tanuk said, "I don't think it will be too hard to follow his trail." "No," agreed Jerome, "it won't." Leading the group, he followed the trail of broken trees through the forest. They came across area after area that showed signs of rampant destruction. "I wonder what he thought he was fighting last night." "Yeah," Tanuk replied. "What could warrant such power?" In his state of mind, Cassie explained, he could have been imagining almost anything. They came to where the trees looked odd. The other tapped one out of curiosity and gasped, "It's stone!" The others came over and felt it, mystified at how James could have done something like that. "Incredible!" exclaimed Tanuk. Continuing on, they came to where the destruction ended, but James was nowhere to be seen. "James!" Jerome called out, looking through the trees as far as he could. When there was no answer, Delia said, "We'd better split up." Jerome nodded. "That might be wise. Let's not get too separated." He looked at each in turn and said, "If in 5 minutes you haven't found him, turn around and come back." They agreed and then headed out into the forest, each calling for James. Now I'm going to pause here for a moment. James does his fever-induced rampage. That happens a couple times throughout the series. When I wrote Dark Shores, that last big battle with James, I really was questioning whether or not he should do that as delirious as he was. But I needed that mass power at the end to end the book as I did, so I had to do it. And I think I worked out. I think I worked it up pretty well to that point, how he got into that state. And then of course he was, yeah. I'm not gonna go too far into it in case you haven't seen it, but yeah. And by the time you get there, you'll probably forget what I said here anyway, if you haven't read Dark Shores. But yeah, I think I've done it a couple times, and I just can't do it anymore, I think. All right. Weak as a newborn lamb and shoulder aflame with pain, James regained consciousness. His head was fuzzy, and it was hard to formulate thoughts. He realized that he lay beneath a pile of leaves and tree limbs, and that everything was damp. Unable to even lift his arms to remove the foliage from him, he lay there, wondering just how he had come to be there. James! Suddenly alert, he heard his name being called from far away. "They'll never find me here." Afraid they might pass him, he started to panic. He tried calling out, but only managed a weak, raspy, "Help! Why am I so weak?" He tried again, "Help!" This time managing a little volume. "I think I heard something," he heard someone shout. "Where?" another voice asked. "Not sure," the first voice replied. "James, where are you?" He heard several people move through the forest near and around him. Giving it one last try, he croaked, "Over here!" Again it came out barely audible. "There!" he heard someone shout. "It came from that way." Suddenly, Delia stepped into view as she walked right by where he lay. He moved his hand slightly and it caught her eye. "Here he is!" she cried excitedly. "Are you all right?" she asked as she placed her hand on his forehead. Shaking his head no, he just laid there. When the rest arrived, she said, "His fever is gone, but he said he isn't good." "Then let's get him out," Jerome said. All but James's head and one arm was hidden beneath the pile of debris. They removed the limbs and leaves and then helped him to stand, but in his weakened condition, his legs were unable to support his weight and they gave out beneath him. Jerome and Tanuk moved to help. Jerome on the left side, Tanuk on the right. When Tanuk placed Jerome's right arm over his shoulder for support, James cried out in pain from the stress being put on the wound from the crossbow bolt. Realizing they were not going to be able to do it that way, Jerome lifted him in his arms. but James was too heavy for him to attempt to carry all the way back to the campsite. "I got an idea," Cassie said. Grabbing Tinook, she said to the others, "Just make him comfortable and we'll be right back." They ran toward the wagons. Jerome set James down on a fallen log and stayed beside him, keeping him upright. "What's she going to do?" he asked Delia. "Not sure," she replied. He returned to James. "What happened to you last night?" "Huh? Well, what do you mean?" he asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "Don't you remember anything?" He shook his head. "The last thing I remember was lying on the ground back at camp. Then nothing until I woke up here, heard my name being called. Why?" "You woke in the middle of the night and all hell broke loose," he explained. "You were fighting something. Cassie thought you were just being delusional because of the fever. You threw magic around, creating havoc as if you were under attack." James stared in disbelief as Jerome recounted what happened and the destruction encountered during the search for him. "At first we thought we were under attack," he continued, "but we realized it was the fever doing it to you. Then you ran off in the forest, and for a while we heard you blowing things up. It lasted well over an hour before you finally stopped. Couldn't come for you until morning. Didn't want to risk getting lost and separated." "Sorry," James said apologetically. "No one got hurt," Delia said, "and it seems that it was good for you. The fever's gone." They waited for the return of Cassie and Tunic. Just when Jerome was about ready to leave to find them, they showed up carrying a stretcher made from 2 long tree limbs and a couple of blankets. They set it down near James, and then Tunic and Jerome helped him onto it. With Jerome in the front and Tunic taking the rear, they carried him through the forest and back to camp. As they passed through the area of destruction, James was reminded of a similar instance back near Trindle. He just shook his head in regret at the destroyed trees. When they passed the petrified one, Tunic said, "How did you do that?" "What?" he asked, lifting his head a little to see what the knifer was talking about. "That tree there," he replied, indicating with a nod of his head. "What's wrong with it?" "It's as hard as stone," he explained. "Let me see," he said, and they carried him close enough so we could touch it. When he felt the tree, he said, "Petrified, I would guess." "Petrified?" Cassie asked. "Petrification is when minerals in the ground are absorbed by a living organism and over time is turned hard as rock." "How did you manage that?" Tinook asked. "I haven't the slightest idea," he admitted, "but I plan on thinking about it now that I know it can be done." Okay, petrified wood. When I was a boy, my mom and Ralph, Grandpa Ralph, who I have a playlist of here on YouTube for, they brought me back this little block of petrified wood because they went to the petrified forest. And that always fascinated me. I guess that's where this comes from. They resumed carrying him until they returned to camp, where they laid him down and started a fire to warm him. Cassie replaced his bandage with a fresh one containing more of her poultice. Once they had the fire going and James had eaten his fill, he said, "We should get going. We've still got to reach Corazon before the slavers." "Are you well enough to travel?" Jerome asked. "No, but we have little choice," he replied. "I can rest in the wagon." "All right," Jerome said. "Let's get ready to go." He and Tinook began the process of securing the traces on the draft horses. When they were set, they helped James up onto the wagon next to Delia. Tinook and Cassie took up the second wagon, and Jerome rode point. The 5 remaining horses were tied in line at the rear. "Let's go," Jerome said as he nudged his horse into motion. This time, Delia and Tinook were more skilled at controlling the wagons and were able to make better time. They followed the road for the rest of the day, at times having to stop while everyone except James got down and helped push one when it got stuck in the mud. Just a brief stop for lunch, and then they resumed their journey. James drifted in and out of sleep throughout the day, and by the time they made camp that night, had regained enough of his strength to be able to come down from the wagon by himself. They unhitched the horses and picketed them before making camp. Tinook built a roaring fire to help ward off the chill, and then they ate the last of the rations in the wagons. "Hope we get somewhere soon," commented Tinook. "Afraid of going hungry?" Delia asked with a smile. "No," he replied defensively. "Just tired of being in the mountains." "I find it relaxing," James interjected. Everyone turned and looked at him as he continued, "They've always brought me peace." "There is something tranquil about them," Cassie added. She then rested her head on Tinook's shoulder, who placed his arm around her, keeping her warm. Jerome and Delia glanced at each other and smiled. They sat by the fire, the pop and crackle of the wood leading a peacefulness to the night. It wasn't long before James had fallen asleep. The rest soon followed. The next morning, the overcast sky of the day before had made way for a beautiful sunny morning. Beautiful sunny sky. Not morning, but sky. Come on, S. Yeah, my S keeps the sticks. Hang on 1 second. Once the remaining cloud cover had burned off, everyone's mood was much improved, and they were soon on the road. As he rode along in the wagon, James realized that the sun was rising on their left. Headed south, he figured. Yeah. About midday, the road descended gradually, and everyone was glad that they would soon be out of the mountains. Everyone, that was, but Tanaku said, "I don't know why you're all so happy." "What do you mean?" Dilly asked. "I thought you wanted to be out of the mountains." "I do, but once we're out of the mountains, we're going to be in Empire territory again. Doesn't that make you the least bit nervous?" "A little," she replied, "but I prefer to hope for the best. Besides," added James, "we now have a reason for being here. I think we've even got a letter that will allow us to pass through." "Well, I hope so," Tanuk replied. He quieted down, keeping his brooding thoughts to himself. The trees thinned with the lower elevation, and they saw off in the distance where they would be coming out of the mountains. A road appeared farther down, running along the base of the mountains, heading east to west. An hour later, they reached where their path would be leaving the protection of the trees as it made its way out to the main road. They paused only momentarily as they checked for travelers who might observe their emergence from the mountains. Not seeing anyone, they quickly made their way out upon it. "Which way?" Jerome asked James. "Let's try east and see if a road heading south hooks up with this one," he suggested. "If we find that this road turns northward farther along, we'll double back and see what's to the west of us." Jerome turned his horse eastward and led them down the road. So that's chapter 6. James got through the night, burnt the fever out, woke up weak but better. He's on the mend. They got wagons, they got goods, they got gold, horses. Things are looking up, but they're going into enemy territory. So that's kind of problematic. So we still don't know what's going on with Miko. We don't know anything about Tursa, Jerome's sister. Was she captured? Was she not captured? We'll find out at some point, I'm sure. Anyway, that was chapter 6. Personal stuff. My brother and his wife still here. They'll leave Monday. Today is Saturday. Today is Pizza Hut. Yep, we're going to Pizza Hut. And then lots of canasta today. I'll do chapter 7 tomorrow. And you all take care. Thanks for hanging with me. Oh, one more thing. Since I've started doing Fires of Prophecy here, reading the chapters, I've had not one book to download. I don't think it's connected, but it's weird. I haven't had one in like a week now, and that's pretty bad. Well, that's on Amazon. That's only Kindle. That's really the only place I track daily. The other places don't have as good of a reporting as Kindle does. So I track Kindle, and I haven't had one download to Kindle. So that's concerning. I don't think it's because of this. It could be, but I just don't think it is. I don't know. Anyway, y'all take care.